In 1882, a book was produced by an American dentist, John Ballou Newbrough, who reported it to have been written by automatic writing. This was transmitted by one of Confederation's social memory complex status, whose idea, as offered to the council, was to use some of the known physical history of the so-called religions or religious distortions of our cycle, in order to veil and partially unveil aspects or primal distortions of the law of one. All names can be taken to be created for their vibrational characteristics. The information buried within has to do with a deeper understanding of love and light, and the attempts of infinite intelligence through many messengers to learn those entities of our sphere. Also, the Confederation passed what we would call technical information in attempts to aid this planet in service to others. The one known as Nikola received information from Confederation sources desirous of aiding this extremely, shall we say, angelically positive entity in bettering the existence of its fellow mind-body-spirit complexes. It is unfortunate, shall we say, that like many wanderers, the vibratory distortions of third-density illusion caused this entity to become extremely distorted in its perceptions of its fellow mind-body-spirit complexes, so that its mission was hindered and, in the result, perverted from its purposes. The most desired purpose of the mind-body-spirit complex, Nikola, was the freeing of all planetary entities from darkness. Thus, it attempted to give to the planet the infinite energy of the planetary sphere for use in lighting and power. The product of such a freeing would create two experiences. Firstly, the experience of no need to find the necessary emolument for payment in our money for energy. Secondly, the leisure afforded, thereby exemplifying the possibility and enhancing the probability of the freedom, then to search the self for the beginning of seeking the law of one. Few there are working physically, from daybreak to darkness, as we name them, upon our plane, who can contemplate the law of one in a conscious fashion. Very positively oriented so-called scientists, gathered by the entities of a mixed orientation, have received information intended to unlock peaceful means of progress. However, the scientists who followed their work were of mixed orientation, including one extremely negative entity, as we would term it. Thus, information which Confederation sources had offered to our entity, Albert, became perverted, and instruments of destruction began to be created, examples of this being the Manhattan Project and its product. Information offered through Wanderer sound vibration Nikola, also being experimented with for potential destruction. Example, our so-called Philadelphia experiment. Thus, those of the Confederation felt a strong need to involve their thought forms, in whatever way they could be of service, in order to balance these distortions of information meant to aid our planetary sphere. The Council of Saturn granted permission not to break quarantine by dwelling among us, but to appear in thought form capacity for those who have eyes to see. That permission was granted at the time-space in which our first nuclear device was developed and used for Confederation members to minister unto our peoples in such a way as to cause mystery to occur. The mystery and unknown quality of the occurrences the Confederation members are allowed to offer have the hoped-for intention of making our peoples aware of infinite possibility. When our peoples grasp infinity, then and only then can the gateway be open to the law of one. There are other services the Confederation may perform. Firstly, the integration of souls or spirits, if you will, in the event of use of these nuclear devices in our space-time continuum. This the Confederation has already done. The use of intelligent energy, transforming matter into energy, is of such a nature among these weapons that the transition from space-time third density to time-space third density, or what we may call our heaven worlds, is interrupted in many cases. Therefore, the Confederation members are offering themselves as those who continue the integration of soul or spirit complex during transition from space-time to time-space. Those who were destroyed not by radiation, but by the trauma of the energy release, found not only the body-mind-spirit complex made unviable, but also a disarrangement of that unique vibratory complex we have called the spirit complex, which those of the Confederation understand as a mind-body-spirit complex to be completely disarranged without possibility of reintegration. This would be the loss to the Creator of part of the Creator, and thus the Confederation was given permission not to stop the events, but to ensure the survival of the, shall we say, disembodied mind-body-spirit complex. This is accomplished through their understanding of dimensional fields of energy. The higher or more dense energy field will control the less dense. The Confederation did this in those events of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, losing no spirit or portion or holograph or microcosm of the macrocosmic infinite one. It would be more traumatic than any other causes of death. However, the entity would remain an entity, and it would take much longer space-time for these entities to fully begin the healing process of that trauma, despite they were being helped as much as possible. Once the healing has taken place, the harvest may go forth unimpeded. However, such actions as nuclear destruction affect the entire planet. There are no differences at this level of destruction, no distinction being made betwixt victim and aggressor, this due to damage done to the planet. And the planet will need to be healed. Healing is a process of acceptance, forgiveness, and if possible, restitution. The restitution not being available in time-space, there are many among our peoples now attempting restitution while in the physical. These attempt feelings of love towards the planetary sphere and comfort and healing of the scars and the imbalances of these actions. A race which uses the second density form is that being offered a dwelling in this density by guardians who wish to give the mind-body-spirit complexes of those who are of this density at this time appropriately engineered physical vehicles, as we would call these chemical complexes, in the event that there is what we call nuclear war. These are beings which exist as instinctual second-density beings, which are being held in reserve to form what we would call a gene pool, in case these body complexes are needed. These body complexes are greatly able to withstand the rigors of radiation, which the body complexes we now inhabit could not do. These body complexes dwell in uninhabited deep forest. There are many in various places over the surface of our planet. These are Bigfoot-type creatures, although the Confederation would not call these Bigfoot, as they are scarce and are very able to escape detection. These beings are very able to escape due to their technological understandings before their incarnations here. These entities of the glowing eyes are those most familiar to our peoples. In the 1950s, Dwight Eisenhower met with thought forms which were indistinguishable from third density. This was a test. Those of the Confederation wished to see what would occur if this extremely positively oriented and simple congenial person, with no significant distortions towards power, happened across peaceful information and the possibilities which might append therefrom. They discovered that this entity did not feel that those under his care could deal with the concepts of other beings and other philosophies. Thus, an agreement reached, then allowed him to go his way, themselves to do likewise, and a very quiet campaign, as the Confederation members have heard we call it, be continued alerting our peoples to their presence gradually. Events have overtaken this plan. Some of our peoples were, in thought form, transported by Confederation thought form vehicular illusion in order to give those mind-body-spirit complexes data so that the Confederation members might see how this type of contact aided our people in the uncovering of the intelligent infinity behind the illusion of limits. In observing the distortions of those who underwent this experiential sequence, the Confederation decided to gradually back off, shall we say, from direct contact in thought form. The least distortion seems to be available in mind-to-mind communication. Therefore, the request to be taken aboard is not one the Confederation cares to comply with. There are bases, shall we say, in the underground honeycombed areas of those from elsewhere, both positive and negative. There are abandoned cities. These bases are used for the work of materialization of needed equipment for communication with third-density entities and for resting places for some equipment which we might call small craft. These are used for surveillance when it is requested by entities. Thus, some of the, shall we say, teachers of the Confederation speak partially through these surveillance instruments along computerized lines, and when information is desired and those requesting it are of the proper vibratory level, the Confederation entity itself will then speak. However, many of our peoples request the same basic information in enormous repetition, and for a social memory complex to speak ad infinitum about the need to meditate is a waste of the considerable abilities of such social memory complexes. Thus, some entities have had approved by the Council of Saturn the placement and maintenance of these message givers for those whose needs are simple, thus reserving the abilities of the Confederation members for those already meditating and absorbing information which are then ready for additional information. Those of the Confederation are, at the call of those upon our planet. If the call, though sincere, is fairly low in consciousness of the, shall we say, system, whereby spiritual evolution may be precipitated, then the Confederation may only offer that information useful to that particular caller. This is the basic difficulty. Entities receive the basic information about the original thought and the means, that is, meditation and service to others, whereby this original thought may be obtained. Please note that, as Confederation members, they are speaking for positively oriented entities. They believe the Orion group has precisely the same difficulty. Once this basic information is received, it is not put into practice in the heart and in the life experience, but instead rattles about within the mind complex distortions, as would a building block, which has lost its place and simply rolls from side to side uselessly, yet still the entity calls. Therefore, the same basic information is repeated. Ultimately, the entity decides that it is weary of this repetitive information. However, if an entity puts into practice that which it is given, it will not find repetition except when needed. The planet known as Saturn has a great affinity for the infinite intelligence, and thus it has been dwelled upon in its magnetic fields of time-space by those who wish to protect our system. The planetary entity, known as Uranus, is slowly moving through the first density and has the potential of moving through all densities.